Welcome everyone to the Babylon Cast. Today we are speaking with Dr. Iona Italia. She is the managing editor for Quillette and has her own Substack, The Second Swim. You can also find her written works in The Times, The Washington Examiner, The Indian Quarterly, and Uncommon Ground Media. We discuss the rules of engagement regarding close friends and family when discussing contentious political topics. We also discuss the quality of the discourse and political commentary that many are subjected to daily, and much more. You can find her socials and relevant websites in the description of the video below. It was a pleasure to have her on, and we hope you enjoy the video. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Babylon Cast. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Vern, alongside my good friend, my co-host, Bruce. Bruce, how are you doing today?
Very well. Very much looking forward to the conversation with our guest, an old friend.
Yeah, today we're speaking with Dr. Iona Italia. She holds a PhD in English literature from the University of Cambridge. She is the managing editor for Quillette and has her own Substack, The Second Swim, where she writes about travel, tango, chess, politics, really just about anything under the sun. If you check this out and there's no topics there that interest you, then you must be the most boring person on the planet. And you can also find her written works. Yeah, or sensible. You can also find her written works in The Times, The Washington Examiner, The Indian Quarterly, and Uncommon Ground Media. And she is currently working on her third book with the working title, The Second Swim. Dr. Italia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Vern. Please do call me Iona.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll call you Iona then. One of the reasons why we invited you is because you wrote this article that we thought was the perfect catalyst to have this type of conversation that me and Bruce have been wanting to have. It's no secret that nowadays we have a pretty tumultuous type of relationship with one another, given how crazy politics are. And so you wrote an article about your friend, kind of originally distancing himself away from you, but then recanting it because of politics. And so we were wondering if you just want to give a brief rundown of what that article is about and the general thesis of it, so to have that conversation.
So the article is called Gracious Concessions, and what prompted the article was that I received an email from an old friend of mine, someone I used to be close to. I say used to only because I live in Australia, so I have friends scattered all over the world, and one of the few bad things about living here is that I have a lovely circle of friends here, but I don't see my older friends very often, and in many cases will probably never see them again. So that's the only reason I'm using the past tense. But somebody who I have actually worked with a lot as a dancer, and with whom I used to be pretty close for years. And I always just assume with such people that even if I don't see them, we still retain a fondness for each other. And if we were in the same place, we could rekindle our friendship, etc. And he sent this email, which just said that it was really kind of a diatribe. It was very snarky in tone. And basically, he blames me for the election of Donald Trump, this Donald Trump's second term, and all of the things that are happening during Donald Trump's second term, even though I've been opposed to Trump since he first entered the fray in the primaries way back in the 2010s. And I actually wrote a piece with a number of other journalists and public intellectuals and public figures urging people who were more on the heterodox side of things not to vote for Trump. This was in the first Trump election. And Quillette has been has taken a mostly extremely anti-Trump stance since, particularly in this second term. We have been positive about one or two things that have happened during the Trump presidency, in particular the executive orders against DEI in the government. We supported those, but other than that, it has been relentless and I think completely justified and well argued criticisms of Trump that I've personally published and written, and that the magazine I work for has written. So it's very odd to blame me for Trump's being in power, but he feels that um, anyone who is on the center, any centrists who've been critical of the excesses of the left, are partly complicit in Trump's election. And he was very dramatic about the consequences of Trump's election. He said that it would lead to his own marriage being dissolved. He's a gay man. He's married to another man, and that people would be rounded up on the streets. He sounded like he was in real serious distress and fear, and he blamed me. And he was quite kind of personally nasty. And I received this email, and then immediately afterwards, so I received two emails at the same time because of the time difference between us. He had written them 12 hours apart, but I read them both one after the other. And the second email said he apologized for what he'd said in the first email, and he took it back. And so that's what happened. And I kind of accepted his apology. I'm glad he apologized. Makes me think better of him, and it neutralized any feelings of anger I had towards him. But I still feel as though I've lost my sense of trust in him. So he's no longer a person I would feel like confiding in. I feel that something has been irreparably broken there. And so I decided to write a piece about the kind of the lost art of friendship with people with whom you are in political disagreement. And I centered it largely around what I think is a very noble and beautiful tradition, which is the tradition of the concession speech, which everybody apart from Donald Trump has seemed to have managed. At the point, at one of your lowest points politically, you have to make a speech in which you take responsibility for having lost an election, and in which you thank your supporters and wish the government that has been elected well. There have been some gorgeous concession speeches in the past. So I remember that I'm just trying to think, during the Ukraine war, I have the neuron that governs people's names is completely burnt out in my brain. So I cannot remember the name of absolutely anybody. But yeah, Rishi Sunak, that's his name. It's an absolute wonder I can remember my own name. Probably only because I see it written down so often. But anyway, Rishi Sunak made this speech, and he said that his young children had expressed dismay at having to move out of 10 Downing Street, etc. And he said to them, look, we shouldn't be upset or sad about this. It's an enormous honor and a privilege to take part in a democratic election, and we are public servants and we serve the will of the people. The people have spoken and they have decided that they want a new government. And in Ukraine, people are fighting and losing their lives for the privilege that we take for granted here. So that was a very beautiful speech. And recently, the Australian elections recently happened, and the Labour Party won by a large majority, and among other things, the leader of the opposition, Peter Dutton, not only lost the election, but he lost his own seat, which he's held for more than 25 years. And he made I thought, an incredibly gracious and beautiful concession speech, probably the most gracious one I've heard ever. And I'm a connoisseur of concession speeches. So I felt that Australian parliamentary politics is a full contact blood sport. Like, people are really nasty to each other in Parliament, But there's that moment of the transfer of power in which people are very gracious. And Anthony Albanese, who was the winning candidate, he was also quite gracious in his acceptance speech about Dutton. So I feel as though we are lacking moments like that in real life. And for once, perhaps the only time, we should take a leaf out of the book of our politicians and see them as a kind of moral example in this.
Yeah, I think that a concession speech is not just a sign of respect for the process of electing a president, or a sign of respect for um, the country, but just a sign of respect also for the people within your country. And it shows a level of maturity that you lost, probably one of the most embarrassing moments you're ever going to have in your entire life. Certainly for someone like Hillary Clinton, and certainly for someone like Kamala Harris. But that concession speech shows a respect not just for the country, but also for people that live within that country that didn't vote for you. And I agree that it's telling when someone doesn't want to make that concession speech, and it makes me raise my eyebrows a little bit as to whether or not this person is even fit to take the position that they just won. And I'm curious, by the way, did your friend think that you wrote more articles that were critical of the left than were critical of Trump, or was it just that the few articles in which you were critical of the left, even if the vast majority of your bandwidth is focused on criticizing, MAGA or Trump or whatever, it was those few articles that were enough? Like, you shouldn't have even criticized your side.
Yeah, I think it's more that I personally have not written a lot of articles critical of Trump. I co-wrote the one article that was before the 2016 election. I've just been responsible for editing and publishing a lot of articles critical of Trump, and I've just been very critical of Trump in interviews. Um, and I have been focusing my writing largely on non-political work more recently because of the book that I'm preparing for at the moment. And I have in the past written a lot of articles that were critical of the left from a liberal leftist perspective. And I would say that my politics have shifted rightward also over the course of the past 4 or 5 years. I'm not one of those people who feel that the left have left me. I have definitely left the left. I take full responsibility for that. And I think that, but I feel that actually a really sort of doubled down, hardcore, progressive tribalism is part of what got Trump elected. So I do believe in a kind of pendulum theory of politics, that when there's a strong feeling in one direction and it starts to become more and more extreme and to sound more and more hectoring and strident in its tone, there is almost inevitably an equal and opposite reaction in amplitude. So I definitely don't feel that the kinds of criticisms of the left that I was making were that I and others were making, that was the instrumental thing in the election of Trump. I feel, on the contrary, that the left, particularly the American left, should have listened to those criticisms, taken them on board, and done a little bit of course correction. And then maybe you wouldn't have Trump now in power.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel kind of the opposite of him, but there's no knowing, there's no telling. When you this image that Ursula Le Guin uses in her book, A Wizard of Earthsea, she writes, when you light a candle, you cast a shadow. So you never know what the outcome of your actions will be. And the things that the arguments you make, you may be making them from a very good faith position and they may be true, and you may nevertheless find that some very unsavory people grab your arguments and run with them and use them to grab power for themselves and to do things that you would never have approved of. So that is always a danger, but I think that you cannot predict that kind of thing. none of us have a crystal ball, and it's a fool's game to try to only only say things or point things out that you think cannot ever do any harm, because doing nothing and saying nothing also has effects, right? Also has impacts and consequences. So you just have to try to look at each thing issue by issue and tell the truth as you see it to the best of your knowledge, and try to hold your beliefs lightly enough that you're ready to have them challenged or changed, which is the most difficult thing of all, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm interested in what your thoughts on this next question will be, because I've I've been grappling with this idea of, if someone is only criticizing one side, but they believe that the other side is more dangerous, but the only reason why they're criticizing their side is because either that's the side that they're more intimately familiar with, and they want to be able to criticize their own side to make sure that they don't come across as biased, or those things that their side is getting wrong matters more to them than criticizing the other side, because those are things that you stand up for. And recently, I've been battling with this because a lot of the people whom I know personally, I'm friends with a handful of Trump supporters. I'm friends with people across all the political spectrum, and many of the people who voted for Trump almost did so as a way to spite the Democratic Party or spite the left, and because they've kind of become believers in this idea that the Democratic Party is, these evil woke scolds that want to knock on everyone's door. Kamala Harris wants to knock on everyone's door and inject estrogen into everyone's child. And one of the things that it kind of got me thinking was, maybe part of the reason why so many people have this, you know, unhinged view of the left or of Kamala Harris isn't necessarily so much because of what it is that they said, but rather because everything that they hear is a criticism of it. So to give a kind of like, example, if you have party A, right? Um, and you have party A and party B, and you genuinely believe that party A is worse, you're party B and you believe that party A is worse. But if all of your criticisms are levied against party B, even if you think that party A is worse, because the only thing that someone is talking about is how bad party B is, everyone who's listening to that will be under the impression that party B must be worse than party A, because they know why you hate, or they know the things that you dislike about party B, but they don't know the things that you dislike about party A. And me personally, I don't think that there's any issue with only criticizing the things that you want to criticize about, right? Write whatever you want to write. It doesn't matter to me. I think it should be upon the responsibility of the reader to form their own opinions. But I also can't shake this feeling, and can't shake this belief that I genuinely have, that I think it is the case that so many people, particularly, the anti-woke kind of centrist types of people, because everything that they talked about was the left and the excesses of the left and how bad the left is and how unhinged the left is, and almost so much so to the point where it was excusing all the things that the right was doing. And I include myself in that, because we had the Babylon Project for the longest time, and then like 95% of the stuff that we talked about was the excesses of the left. But because of that, I never felt like we were given a good counterweight towards the right, because at the end of the day, I don't think that there's anything as bad that the Democratic Party did. I don't think there's anything that the Democratic Party did that's anywhere as bad as like the fake elector plot that Donald Trump engaged in, or the Fox Dominion lawsuit. Like, when I think about stuff like that, I can't think of an equivalent on the left. But you've created that equivalent, or I think certain people have created that equivalent because that's all that they do and that's all that they talk about. And so for me, and this is my question to you. Sorry, I don't mean to ramble on too much. I'm having difficulty kind of, squaring my belief that you should write whatever you want to write, however it's interpreted is upon the responsibility of the reader, much in the same way that, if you watch a kid watches a violent movie, it's not the responsibility of the movie, it's the responsibility of the kid or the parents or whatever. But I'm having difficulty squaring that with the reality, with I think the reality that, yeah, this kind of culture in which everyone only criticized one side and not the other side, almost making it seem as if, well, it's obvious that the other side is bad, right? The mainstream media is covering that, but none of the new media was. And so everyone kind of felt like, well, let's vote for Trump then. I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that, though?
Mm, mm. Yeah, so I think that um, I think that whether you prefer criticizing your own side or whether you prefer criticizing the other side is largely a question of personality, um, rather than rather than deliberate strategy. So I think that there's always a majority of people on any one side who are keener on criticizing the other. So if we looked at all of the left-wing media, all of the left-wing pundits, and we scored them, which of them are more focused on criticizing the left and which are more focused on criticizing the right. I don't know, I haven't done this survey, but I'm pretty sure that although we're more interested in, we read more of those who criticize the left, if you took all of them together, I'm sure that the majority of them are mostly focused in their criticism on the right. Um, and the same is true of the right, of course. In fact, I think in the right it's even more the case. The right does tend to be. I do believe that there is. I think it's Nathan Kovnas who says this. There is an IQ gap. He actually thinks there is an actual IQ gap. There's certainly an educational gap between the right and the left, especially in America, and it's in the left's favor. The left has more university educated people. The left probably tends to do, I think, more long form commentary, more serious analysis. I'm not saying that there's none of that on the right, but the lion's share of it is on the left. And part of that is leftist capture of institutions. So they've become hostile to right wingers. And part of that is, I think, there is just a natural tendency for intellectuals to lean left. And I say this as somebody who's kind of leaning right nowadays. I think that a number of people have talked about this. Richard Hanania also talks about, he calls it the right's stupidity problem. I think that's Richard. I can't remember which is Richard and which is Nathan Kovnas. Both of them have talked about this issue. And I think Nathan has claimed to have some evidence that there's an actual IQ gap. So there is less, I think, self-criticism on the right, especially in America, but it's also the case that some right-wingers are largely self-critical, but most are focused on critiquing the left. Now, because the left tends to have more intellectuals, more highly educated, more very highly informed and thoughtful people, there does tend to be, the upshot of all this is that the left gets criticized more than the right, because the left is criticized by all of the people on the right, plus a fair proportion of people on the left who are doing a lot of self-criticism. So there is always a little bit of an imbalance. I think that is inevitable, and it's rather similar in a sense to the imbalance, although it's not morally weighted in the same way, let me make that clear, but it's a little similar to the imbalance in self-criticism in democracies versus autocracies. And I can't remember who it is who said this, but I think it might just have been one of the things that Orwell said. But either Orwell or someone like this says, if you are in a place where everyone is telling you that the place is a utopia and the government is really great and everything is fantastic, you should run from that place because you have found yourself in a uniparty dictatorship, in a totalitarian dictatorship. And if you're in a place where everybody is griping and complaining and talking about how shit things are and how bad the politics are, and everybody is fighting with each other, you're in a healthy society, a democratic society. So democracies are self-critical, partly because that's the only place you can be self-critical, and partly because they also just allow and foster and encourage a freedom of thought, and freedom of thought will always lead to disagreement and self-criticism. Of course, it can go way, way, way too far, and you get a lot of kind of leftists who are burn it all down. Here in Australia, their motto is "the colony must fall," which I find just sort of hilarious and sad. Um, the colony is is not going to fall, but I think there's no way of preventing people from being stupid like that without becoming becoming what you most hate. You can't effectively shut them up without becoming a totalitarian society. It's tempting sometimes, but
Well, it's definitely tempting at times to get involved in those kinds of arguments, but like in my most optimistic moments, I like to believe that for all our disagreements, we, whether on whatever side of the political spectrum we stand on, we still would like to approach truth. That's, we can debate the virtues of that, but um, taking the conversation down this particular route for a minute, like someone once told me that holding back a truth from someone, especially if he or she is a friend, the person in your article, often harms rather than helps, and the speaking the truth should take precedence over feelings. I know you're familiar with a man named Matt Thornton. He's the author of The Gift of Violence,
oh
and
yes, I know
yeah,
Matt. Yes.
yeah, and to some degree, Matt's been a giant in my own personal and dare I say, it's a kind of sort of professional. Well, I'm exaggerating there. He's been a giant in my intellectual life, in both my martial arts practice and um, in the area of the intelligentsia. He's one of the few people who led me to Sam Harris's work, which kickstarted this whole thing. I met him in my early 20s. I remember back then, he's not quite like this now, but he was one of the most blunt, direct people I've ever met in my entire life, and I considered him someone who, if you don't want to know the answer to a question, don't ask it. And a lot of people online were really turned off by this habit, but for me, it was a habit that I actually liked because I knew for a fact that he never, ever bullshit me. And in hindsight, his advice and his words often hit the target dead center more often than not. Now, admittedly, it's not the best way to make friends, but I think it actually helps to communicate truth and to cut straight to the heart of an issue. Like, you see debaters like Matt Dillahunty make use of it, and it leaves someone who's trying to weasel their way out of a tough intellectual spot with few options other than offer direct responses. And the more and more someone tries to make a disingenuous point, the more and more foolish they look. And in those arenas, I think it's great. But in the more social ones, it often puts someone who is not a weasel, who's not trying to be one, in the uncomfortable position of being in the hot seat. And more often than not, they offer very poorly thought out responses, which can escalate the emotional heat in the room.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
we can make the argument that if we were more straightforward, a lot of misunderstanding can be avoided. And truthfully, I favor that avenue. But I also acknowledge it's a catch-22. I can't be straightforward because it will be taken the wrong way. Do you often find yourself in this kind of dilemma when you're writing or having conversations in your personal life?
When I'm writing, no. So I think there are two different things here. So I feel what I did when my friend wrote to me, other than writing back to just say that I accepted his apology, and I thought it was big of him to apologize. I didn't continue the conversation with him personally, so um, I didn't try to call him on his progressive politics. I didn't try to get into an argument about that or debate. Instead, I wrote the piece, which doesn't name him, and I think there are very few people who will know who I'm specifically referring to. I was careful not to put in any identifying details. I did just say that he was someone I worked with as a dancer, but I worked with a lot of people as a dancer, um, and I'm close to a lot of people who are or used to be close to. In that I'm using it in that sense I explained before. I don't mean that I don't no longer like them or anything. I used to be close to a lot of people in the US because I spent a lot of time in America at one stage in my life, and um, I haven't identified him in any way publicly, and I also haven't addressed it to him. I've just used it as a springboard to talk about the issue more generally, and that is in general what I'm doing with my personal friends. So if I see that a personal friend or even somebody who I'm quite friendly with on Twitter is posting things that I just think are extremely wrong, I don't go into their mentions or social media or uh, talk to them in private and try to convince them one on one. I just think I need to keep making the counter argument to this, because if this convinces my friend, it will convince other people. So I just need to go on posting and arguing and publishing things that make the counter argument, rather than confronting them personally. So I do, for example, some people um, who I'm have always been kind of very friendly with, who have become really strong free Palestine types. These are mostly not my personal friends, but people I know on Twitter, um, and are just posting things that if it was somebody I didn't know and they posted that, I would probably just block them when I saw it. But since it's people I know, I'm not going to block them. We're still following each other, and I just scroll on by. I'm just like, I'm not going to respond to this because I don't want to fight with that person. What I want to do is um, contribute more widely to the argument in a way that people can find and respond to, and come to their own conclusions about. And I think that even though I was very shocked by some of the things that happened post 7th October. It's been a watershed moment for me in terms of how people responded. The people who were chanting "Gas the Jews" at Sydney Opera House on the immediately after October 7th, before there'd even been any kind of military response from Israel. Um, those people are not among my friends, and if I saw one of my friends supporting that, I would probably distance myself from them. But my friends are also, everybody is trying to make sense of something that is quite complex and multifaceted, and also goes back years, decades, centuries in some cases. And everyone is bombarded by articles and images and videos. And nowadays it's even hard to tell what's true and what's not true, and what's actual footage and what's AI generated. Um, and so everybody is just trying to make sense of the stream of information that is coming at them. That doesn't mean to say that there isn't a right and a wrong. I believe there's a right and a wrong, but the way to promote the right and fight the wrong is not to kind of get into, for me at least, not to get into personal arguments with friends. I think that I also don't have the right personality for that. I would just get upset, and it would just lead to a rift in my friendships with those people without actually changing their minds. Some people are more skilled at these kinds of discussions than I am, and they should go out and have those kinds of discussions. But I, I generally, my kind of rule is if I'm already close to someone, and especially if that's someone who has been kind to me in the past, and I hear them voicing an opinion which I think is just wrong, then I'm just scrolling on by and disregarding that opinion. Because I do think that the most important thing in private life is how people behave towards one another in private. And someone who is generous to me in private, I'm not going to get into a fight with them about their political opinions. But I do understand that that's just one approach to it, and um, I do understand why other people don't take that approach. But that's my personal feeling.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because that is something that I've noticed that I've kind of had to figure out different ways to navigate conversations with people that I know in person. One of my best friends growing up, he's not listening to this, so I can say what I want. But one of my best friends growing up, for example, is very ardently against Trump, very much pro Palestine, that type of person, and he went so far as to unfollow on Instagram, the people that were supportive of Trump, and whom he felt that he just didn't really see a need to continue having conversation. There's one person in particular, a friend that he was friends with since kindergarten, who, once Trump won, that person posted up something on their story about making fun of trans people, saying that I think it was, trans people have to be scared now or something like that. And so that was enough for him to disassociate with that person. And the reason why I kind of feel like I have to navigate myself in a strange way around him is because, even though it's very difficult to find someone who hates Trump more than me, but even though me and him probably align on that, I don't align with him on the pro-Palestine position that he's adopted. And with me knowing what he did with that other friend, the pro-Trump friend, I'm wary to discuss that topic with him, because that's not a
Mm-hmm.
relationship I want to lose. This is someone that I've been
Yeah.
friends with since third grade. Third grade. I've been friends with him since third grade, and I I value that friendship more than I value whatever benefits can come from this conversation that I just know is going to be a landmine. And so that kind of got me thinking, and I feel like you already answered it, but we'll see what you think. That kind of got me thinking about, there's got to be a limit in terms of what it is that you find acceptable to associate with, because we often hear about how you should be able to speak to anyone whom you disagree with, regardless of what their viewpoints on. And I do believe that, right? If I had a podcast, and I'm the type of person that would invite whomever. I'm the type of person that would speak to whoever across the street. But there's certainly a limit. And there's actually a situation that Bruce brought to my attention that I wasn't fully aware of, with Jordan Peterson, where everyone was clamoring about Jordan Peterson having on Richard Spencer onto his podcast. And Jordan Peterson said no, that he wasn't going to have him on his podcast, because he said that, what my views are, what his views are. There's no positive thing that can come from this. So he just didn't have him on, right? Like, what I believe, what he believes. I just don't want to put him on my podcast. It could only mean good things for him. And it and that to me seems perfectly justifiable, right? But if you translate that into real life, it I feel like it's very similar. It's similar enough logic to the point where you can't really complain about it. And now, it's not a matter of whether or not it's not a matter of whether or not people are debating if you should speak to anyone whom you disagree with, right? Like, you should speak to anyone that disagrees with you. Open dialogue, free marketplace of ideas. It's not so much that. It's just that you know, there's a limit. It's just that people don't think that supporting Trump is anywhere near as bad as supporting the stuff that Richard Spencer supports, or uh, you know, you know, if you came across someone in real life who was very perfectly, amicable, they're very nice, they're very polite with you, but then you realize that he secretly believes that we should be executing everyone who isn't white in the United States, and or doing something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, as nice as they are to you, you probably wouldn't want to, hang out with them or something. I don't think I would. And so, I feel like you already answered it, but we'll see. what are your thoughts on like that then? Like, because you did say that there are some people that you wouldn't really
Mm-hmm.
want to, associate with. I mean, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that. Oh,
Before you
sorry.
answer that, Iona,
Mm.
I just need to clarify one thing, just in case our listeners misunderstand this. Jordan actually didn't make that response. That was something that a friend of mine thought that how he should reply to Spencer when he made that
Oh,
Twitter post
Okay.
a while
okay,
back. But like, he just ignored Richard Spencer. But please continue.
okay. My
Oh,
apologies.
yeah. I think there are a couple of things here. One is, let's see, would I have Richard Spencer or I don't know, would he's dead now, and so many people have been killed by Israel. Yeah, I'm kind of happy about this, and not so many people. Don't quote me on that. So many leaders, Islamist leaders, Hamas leaders, have been killed by Israel that I can't come up with I don't know who the leaders currently are. But let's say, would I have Yahya Sinwar on my podcast? If I felt that I were the kind of person who is very good at debate, and who is extremely forceful and good at standing up to somebody else's and debunking someone else's nonsense, then yes, I would. And I know that Douglas Murray had all kinds of people on, has spoken to all kinds of people publicly, including some Islamist terrorists. And this is the kind of thing that someone like Christopher Hitchens did. But I do not have the personality or the intellectual kind of sparring skills to do that kind of thing, especially not verbally. So I personally would not, because I don't like to, and I don't feel I'm good at um, having a really kind of adversarial conversation in a podcast. I personally only have people um, on the Quillette podcast, or when I had my own podcast as well, because I choose my guests on the Quillette podcast when I'm hosting. I co-host with John Kay, so he chooses his guests, I choose mine. And I only have people on who I like and whose views I'm in broad agreement with, because I don't feel that I really am the right person to be able to stand up to and debunk things I don't agree with. So I don't want to give somebody a platform unchallenged if I disagree with them strongly. But when it comes to friendships, is there a point at which I would no longer be friends with a person? Yes, definitely. There definitely is a point. And I do have a person who I used to be friendly with and fairly close to, and she has become I haven't followed her very recently, but she's become a devotee of QAnon. She's really gone down that rabbit hole. She really believes in for example, the pizza parlor, pedophile pizza parlor thing. And she's also got extremely into what they call it transvestigation. She basically believes that all famous people are the opposite sex from the sex that we think they are. So all famous Hollywood women, female stars, are actually men who've transitioned, and the male stars are women who've transitioned. I mean, I don't know what the point of this would be, why we would reverse the sex of everybody. It seems like a lot of trouble to go to. But for example, she will do things like she'll post a photo of some very beautiful Hollywood star, let's say Gal Gadot, who's getting a lot of attacks for being Israeli, but this is not about her being Israeli. She'll post a photo of Gal Gadot and she'll say, she'll put some marks on it, some annotations, and she'll say, look at the line of her jaw. She's clearly had facial feminization surgery, but originally this must have been a man's jaw. And there'll be like a shadow where, because of the angle of the camera or something, and she will claim this shadow shows that Gal Gadot has actually got an Adam's apple. And then she'll be like, look at the line of her her clavicle. This is clearly a man's chest wall, etc. So, and she does this with many celebrities, and I have just quietly ceased contact with her. Because as she just, I feel sorry for her, actually. I just feel that she is, her views have got to a point of extremeness that I think is mental illness. I would also, if my friends were saying things that I considered to be anti-Semitic, I would be I would probably cut them off. Actually, although again, with the exception of very old friends, very close friends, in which case I'm not sure what I would do because I haven't encountered that situation. But um, most of these things are much less extreme than that. It's friends of mine who are, for example, they're strongly in favor of self-ID legislation for trans people, which I oppose. They're in favor of puberty blockers for children, which I oppose. They think that there's a genocide going on in Palestine, which I don't believe, etc. And in all of those cases, I just think they're consuming completely different media from me. They are hearing different arguments from the ones I'm hearing, and they've been persuaded by those arguments. And it has come from a place of wrong-headedness, but not a place of mental illness or evil or anything like that. And I am, in general, just taking an attitude of living and let living, as far as they're concerned. But when I see that kind of thing, it makes me more determined to counter it in my own speech, but not directly speaking to them, but just addressing people publicly in general. So that is my personal approach to it. And I think that so it's a less extreme example, but I have, as I said, my own politics have shifted from kind of center left to center right. And I think that the reasons for that have a lot to do with working at Quillette. And I could work at Quillette as a center-left person. I could have personal politics that are a little left of Quillette's politics. And we do have somewhat of a range of political convictions among the Quillette staff. But I am, and we do also have some leftists who write for Quillette, and particularly now in the era where we're criticizing Trump a lot. We're publishing, for example, we're publishing Matt Johnson, who is one of the leftists who is always criticizing the right. He is not someone who cares to criticize the left. His criticism is focused on the right, and it's very astute and well-argued criticism. I'm a big fan of his, and he's become a Quillette regular. And we have a few other leftists who write for Quillette fairly frequently, like Ralph Leonard, who also used to write for Ario. And I am, but mostly I am reading and listening to and being exposed to a lot of very well constructed and well thought out arguments that take a slightly more center right slant on things. I would say an international center right, not American. And Australia as a country is left shifted of the United States. So probably these people would still be within the larger, broader left wing sphere in America. They just wouldn't be progressives. But here in Australia, that's already on the right side of the spectrum. And because I'm being exposed to so many of those arguments, that I think is what has swayed me. I've become persuaded by many things I've read, and also by my best friend, who is a strong advocate for this, that nuclear power is the most important issue, and that has been outlawed by the left in Australia. And that alone has turned me into a right-winger, because I think that without cheap and abundant power, we can't do anything. And I'm not at all convinced that renewables are going to cut it. I think net zero is misguided. So that's the kind of kind of thing that I've been persuaded by and has shifted me rightwards. And because I've noticed that I've been shifted by reading things, that I myself am very influenceable, um, that has kind of given me an insight into what's happening to other people's minds. Other people are also influenced by the arguments that they are reading. And therefore, politics is complicated. When you go to the ballot box, there's no box that says good. It's not the case that you're presented with two boxes, and one says good and one says evil. And then you have to decide which box you put the cross in. It's politics is granular, and these are complex, multifaceted arguments that people are having that are they're just ongoing. And so I feel I feel just much less inclined to condemn individuals. I think there's also a little bit of I guess I would almost say it's a spiritual belief that of mine, that I'm a radical non-believer in free will. And in a sense, I call this a spiritual belief because, like believing in God, I don't believe in God, but like believing in God, it sort of doesn't make any difference to anything in the real world. Like, I still obviously act and feel as though I have free will. I still treat other people as though they have free will. I still think people should be rewarded and punished as if they have free will for their actions and held responsible, etc. But there's another kind of deeper, like higher level at which I don't believe in free will. And I think that so I feel as though the thing to combat is the ideas and not the people. I feel kind of at a very deep level, I feel sorry for people like Yahya Sinwar, who's now dead. So that's great. I think it's great he's dead. I would like to see every one of the Hamas and Hezbollah and IRGC and all of those people killed. I think some people need to be killed for their own good and the good of humanity. So it's not that I have a soft approach, and I'm also definitely not, and I'm not a pacifist. And I think violence has a role, carefully controlled state violence. But at the same time, I don't kind of feel. I feel just like I'm sorry for those people for having been so incredibly deluded, and having inherited the genes that have given them the personality that they had, for also having been in the environment they've been in, and for having made the choices they've made. And I'm kind of glad to not be them. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's a little bit wishy-washy, but that's my crunchiest, most woo-woo belief.
I don't think that's woo at all. I think that's actually a very very logical a line of thought that you just described. But I want to turn the attention. You actually gave a great segue to the next question I have, and that's it does have to deal with conversations with the everyday person, but it deals with something. It deals with something that I mean disparagingly, called "quote unquote" soccer mom activism. Um, I'll,
Oh,
I'll,
yeah.
I'll yeah, I'll get into a description of what I mean by that. But I've definitely made mistakes in ever since I entered the space. But I like to think that I tried for all my faults to be one of the people who tries to at least to thread the needle carefully between good points that the left and the right both make, and also critique both sides for where I think they're faulty. But what I'm seeing more and more of is this outrage reflex, which goes into that term, soccer mom activism. In other words, what do I mean by that? Someone who is just correctly alarmed by a problem, but because they're so fearful, because they're in such haste, and because they're so panicked to solve it, they ended up lashing out at so quickly and reflexively to anyone who deviates from their interpretation of the problem. Like, one example I'll give is that we recently had John Roush, the author of the Constitution of Knowledge.
I love John. Yeah.
John's great. John's a great
And I
guy.
love that book. Yeah.
Excellent book. One of my favorites on liberalism. And we've had him on. I've spoken to him on another podcast, and I got to meet him live and see him give a lecture at a conference on censorship in the sciences earlier this year.
Fantastic. I'd love to meet him. He seems
He's
like such a
fantastic.
great guy.
He's fantastic. And John is so measured in his arguments. He critiqued the left, and he also brought up his concerns with the right, which I share. But when I was at this event, I was next to this individual who will remain unnamed, who I consider one of those soccer mom activists, and she heard. I know she heard his presentation, his argumentation, and what came out of this person's mouth was, "This guy is still super progressive left. Has he been paying attention to what's been happening under Biden's watch? This whataboutism." And again, those are valid concerns, but her wording and what happened later let me know that she wasn't even trying to look at things objectively. Now, that's the most immediate example of soccer mom activism I can think of. But, like, others include the ongoing discussions of Muslim reform. That, with some reform activists, some reform activists accuse others of being bigots, when in the fact who are being accused are often people who bring a great deal of nuance to the table. And, well, you might have answered this already with your previous example, but, like, in your own circles, have you been seeing more and more of this reflexive outrage and just this derangement?
Um, I would say not really, but I do think my circles are probably a bit atypical. And I did recently have a very big party, and a lot of my friends were there. And I do have a couple of friends who are kind of outliers. I have a couple of friends who voted for the Greens, who would be absolutely my last choice of party. And I also have two friends who both, for different reasons, voted for One Nation, which is the quote unquote far right party here in Australia. And I don't think they're very far right. I mean, Australia is a left-shifted country. They are right of the main parties, though, and they're mostly concerned about immigration. And but the vast majority of my friends are center left or center right, so there's not a lot of space between us. I think that I have noticed it. I've noticed this when dating, that it's become politics is really interfering with my dating life.
Likewise.
I mean, my last boyfriend, no, my penultimate boyfriend, who we already broke up, nearly 2 years ago now at this point. But we broke up because he couldn't deal with my politics. And I think this was even whilst I was still kind of really considering myself a left of center person, just that he is extremely progressive. I don't like to call it far left because he's not a communist. It's not about an economic program, but he is very woke, let's say. I know people aren't using that word much anymore, but I think everyone knows what I mean by that. And he has really if you canvass the opinions of the COVID masked students at a pro-Palestine demonstration in Canada, and you got their opinions on every topic, main political topic, they would align 95% with this guy's opinion. So that might give you a sense of where he's at. And we were very compatible in pretty much every other area, and he just couldn't. He could not understand. Oh, wait, I'm hearing an echo. I'm hearing my own voice as an echo. Oh, it stopped now. That's right. Um, he just could not understand why I held the opinions I held. And I would have been happy to agree to disagree, and just not talk about it. But he really wanted to argue about politics. I could even have dealt with him ranting about politics. I would have just been like, "Yes, darling." But he was interrogating me all the time and constantly asking me to justify. He was constantly reading Quillette and saying, "I read this in Quillette. Can you justify why you said this? Why you published that? Why you said this in your Twitter, etc." Just wanting to have an argument about everything to do with politics. So at one point, he woke up in the middle of the night. I happened to be already awake, and he said, his very first words to me on waking, this was at 3 a.m., was he just couldn't square the person who I was as a person, that I seemed like a good person with how deeply evil my politics were. Um, and this, so eventually we broke up, and we broke up because of this. And I've also had the experience that several men I've dated, things seem to be going well between us, and then they've been like, just want to check. You definitely are a leftist, right? You definitely are left wing, because a few things you said suggested you might not be a supporter of Albo. And this is in Australia, where like there's barely any difference between left and right. Yeah. And when I said that I wasn't, they just ended things. And a couple of other people also who said that they were interested, but then when they discovered Quillette, they didn't want to date me anymore because of Quillette. And so, and Quillette is the most milquetoast centrist publication as far as I'm concerned. We've dealt with some controversial issues, but at the moment it's 50% criticism of Trump, which, these leftists would agree with. So it just seems especially absurd to me, but that has been happening to me quite a lot.
Something I've been talking to some people about is about the second Trump term is that um, there is no IDW to save us this time, and I have various feelings about the IDW and what it once was and what it was considered to be. That's neither here nor there. But following up on my previous example, the same person who was dragging John was granted an audience speaking of the problems with extended lockdowns during COVID. And again, this is another example that it's a completely valid point of concern. But like the conversation in front of this huge audience turned to a question about expertise, and this person said something that I thought was just flagrantly foolish: is we have to become our own experts. And the audience pushed back, thankfully. And, the average person is not going to become a PhD in the medical field. So, and the average person is not going to become, on a mundane level, an expert mechanic in car repairs for everyday tasks and whatnot. And it was really apparent to me that this person just really had not put the effort to think things through. Now, I've been involved with a bunch of activists that are working against the widespread anti-Semitism we're seeing. And in those crowds, I've been really disappointed to hear that argument. You can't shout fire in a crowded theater by people who are trying to use this claim on silencing speech to achieve their aims, which tells me their knowledge of free speech rights is incredibly limited. Now, with the charged outrage, these important dialogues are just becoming even more difficult to have. And in a time when we really need to parse truth, it's even more difficult than it is before. Now, we've seen this kind of outrage culture from social justice warriors, but now we're seeing it in the same pushback space, which is muddling up things even further. Now, I still do this activist work. It's not just against anti-Semitism, but against a bunch of other anti-woke narratives. I don't consider myself anti-woke. I consider myself pro-liberal. But these allies, quote unquote allies, just they concern me as much as the woke do. Now, do you, is this outrage, this counter outrage culture becoming more of an impediment in our intellectual spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that a lot of people, a lot of public intellectuals, influencers, also just entire publications, well, not entire publications, but I would say some independent publications have kind of slanted in an unfortunate direction. I can't think of any publication that no longer has any good stuff in it, but some of them have slanted in an unfortunate direction. I'm not going to name names here of individuals or publications, but I have noticed that there's been this. Um, there has been a radicalization of people on the right and in the anti-woke space as well, and it's um, but many people whose opposition to woke nonsense I thought was based on a belief in and a commitment to liberal enlightenment liberalism have actually it's actually turned out that it was just tribalism, and it's not that they're against authoritarianism and censorship, they just want to be the ones in control of it. And I think a lot of the right in America in particular have been sore winners, as I call it. And I've been extremely disappointed in a number of commentators in the directions that they've taken, and an unwillingness to critique your own side. Um, if even if your side kind of rather than they started off critiquing the left in ways that were intelligent and justified, to my mind, and then instead of staying in the left and critiquing from within, they went over to the right, which is what I did as well, but not in order to start critiquing the right, just to kind of rally around the flag and become completely uncritical, which is just very disappointing to me.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. You're speaking our language. That's one of the things that we've been saying for the past couple of months. Because I remember there was and I won't name who it is, but I remember there was a book written by one of those anti woke authors who you would believe would be under the impression that yeah, freedom of speech is a good thing, and PC culture kind of adds to the detriment of that. But in their book, and I think this was 2020. I think this was 2020 because this is when I went to CPAC. It was 2020. In that book, and I was telling everyone that I went to that convention with, who are largely anti woke people, and I said, in this guy's book, he explicitly states that he's actually perfectly okay with PC culture and the curtailing of free speech, but he just thinks that the left is aiming it in the wrong direction. That was the first time that things started clicking in me and realizing I don't think some of these people are as principled as they claim to be, or at the very least, this principle is a proxy for, as you said, tribal values. But yeah, I'm so glad you said that's one of the things I've been droning on about. But anyways, we want to be respectful of your time, and we're coming up or shortly past after the hour. But is there anything else that you would like to kind of conclude with, or something that you would like to finalize the conversation with? We're really happy that you come on, and we're so grateful to have had you on.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure to be here on Babylon 6, as I think of it.
Yeah,
No, I can't think of anything.
Where can people find you?
They can find me. I have a website actually, which I should go and update. It hasn't been very recently updated, but you can find all my kind of stuff there. It's ionaitalia.com. I think there's no dot in the middle. I think it's just ionaitalia.com. And I'm also at Quillette. So if you go to Quillette, you can find me there. And I think dearest to my heart at the moment is for people to follow my Substack. I had a lot of followers in my Substack, and then I didn't write on the Substack for ages, and everybody left. And I am now finally writing again every week. And there are a lot of back issues as well, and that's where I write mostly personal writing. So please go and check that out. I haven't been very inspired to write about politics, partly because, I'm working for Quillette, and whenever there's a political issue that I could write about, there's somebody who could write about it even better than I could. Well, not even better, who could write about it better than I could, and who would be much more informed, and who can dash something off in a couple of days, whereas I take weeks to write anything. So I've sort of moved largely over to personal writing, and I'm going to also do some literary criticism soon for Quillette. So, come and check me out at my website, or follow me on Twitter at Iona Italia, and or follow my Substack. And the Substack is also, I think it's also my name. So everything is under my name. Yeah, if the Substack is under drionaitalia.com. It's called The Second Swim, but the address is drionitalia.com. So if you Google me and Substack, you'll find me. Yeah.
And
Well, as a personal plug, as a friend to our audience, Iona's been one of the people we've had the fortune of meeting over the last couple of years, who's beloved by so many of the mutual intellectuals and friends that we have, and has been very influential in my own thoughts. So definitely give her a follow.
Oh,
Look at her
the love is
podcast.
reciprocated.
and the links to all of that will be in the description of the video below. So if you guys can just go ahead and click on the description, check it out. Highly recommend it, because I share Bruce's celebration, praise. There we go. Can't think of the word, but
And most of the pieces are free, so I do welcome you to be a free subscriber. I usually paywall pieces that are especially personal, i.e., if someone else, no, not just personal to me, but if someone else might recognize themselves in the piece, I paywall those pieces, kind of more for discretion. I don't never identify anybody. No one else will know it's them. But if they might read it and think, oh God, that's me, then I paywall those pieces. And occasionally I paywall things that are more politically controversial, because why not? So I paywall spicy pieces, but otherwise, most pieces are free. So please come and follow. And if you get intrigued enough to want to read the spicy stuff, you can also become a paying subscriber.
And keep an eye out on that third book as well. It should be coming soon. But yeah, Dr. Iona Italia, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great pleasure. Really enjoyed your presence, and yeah, thank you so much endlessly.
Yes.
Thank you, boys. It's been a pleasure as always.